Awesome. Okay, so we just had a great session from James. Thank you so much, James, for that session. We saved the best for last. Everyone's here for our next session, from manual to automated, implementing least privilege in AWS with SCPs. I'm excited for the session. It's with Cole Horsman, the AVP of Security Operations at Global Atlantic Financial. And just like the last sessions, the chat and the questions are active and watched at all times. Our presenters are here today. Cole, go ahead and join me up here on stage. We're super excited for the session. And yes, again, reminder, even though it's the last day and you've been with us for a few hours, this session is being recorded and we will share the slides. If you have questions throughout the session, drop them in the channel, in the chat on the side, put them in the Q&A. We'll make sure we have lots of time here with Cole questions at the end. So with that, Cole, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll be in the backstage. If you need me, we'll come back on for questions at the end. And with that, take it away, Cole.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Joseph. Much appreciated. Okay. My name is Cole Horsman. Again, I'm the AVP of Security Operations, primarily focused on cloud security at Global Atlantic. I've been here for about 5 years, and I guess you could say that part of the reason that I'm here is because of some of the identity problems. I started out contracting as a consultant, and then Global Atlantic brought me on full time when we were building out their cloud environment to fix some security issues that they had with their legacy environment. I'll get into that here in a minute. Just give you a quick background on Global Atlantic. We are a leading US and retirement life insurance company. We were founded at Goldman Sachs in 2004. What's interesting is that we started out as kind of a startup. It was a creative investment revenue stream for Goldman Sachs, and that separated from Goldman Sachs independently in 2013. KKR, a large private equity company that acquired us, majority acquired us in 2021, saw something in us. Essentially what Global Atlantic's mantra is we can do more with less. We run lean, we work hard, and we have the ability to do pretty incredible things with small teams. So that's a theme that you'll see and that I'll talk about in especially how it relates to identity, doing more with less. So anyway, today, like I said, KKR is fully owns Global Atlantic, and we operate independently as a standalone insurance business. A lot of integration and alignment with them. Essentially, we are kind of the first relationship that KKR has had with one of their acquisitions where we have fully combined. So anyway, that's a little bit of our history. So table of contents here, I'll just kind of run through it. Global Atlantic Financial Group, that's our company. I'm based out of Des Moines, Iowa. We're headquartered out of New York. Got several satellite offices across the US, but that's primarily where we are. Why we're here today is to talk about our journey with our journey to least privilege, cloud identity issues, lessons learned, strategies, pivots, and things like that. And then Sunrise Security and how we discovered them, how we're utilizing them today, and they kind of saved us from our some projects that an initial plan that we were going to implement. That allowed us to save a lot of time and resources to implement Sunray for it. And at the end, I'll talk about a few things that you can do, Sunray or not. And like I said, love that what we've done with Sunray, but there are things that you can do that are open source that we've implemented that have helped us to be able in our cloud identity space. Let's see here. So I'll start out with the Global Atlantic identity composition. So a little history on going back to what we had talked about before, our legacy environment. When I came in, we had a lot of AWS problems. We had a mixed environment for our production. So all of our application teams were sharing one production account, and we had full administrator access for developers. Arguably, the reason I have a job is because of these issues that we have. So I can't really, this was job security for me, but there were a lot of things to address when we first got into this environment. We had access keys that were for pretty much every process. There were no roles that were running processes. This was all driven by access keys. We found access keys any place that you can imagine, S3 buckets running on servers in plain text, none of which were in secret server or anything like that. So we had an uphill battle with identity in the beginning. For system access, again, we had a one-to-many relationship. So one access key would be controlling 5 processes. And when you go to rotate that, you would have to multiply, or you would have to coordinate with several teams just to rotate an access key. So that was kind of job zero, is just visibility, finding out connections to where, and dependencies to where all of these access keys were connected and who it impacted. I hate to say it, but in that environment, I think the easiest way to put it is you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And we had to learn the hard way on a few of those things because of the coupled nature of that environment. A lot of public resources, no encryption standards, no governance or guardrails. This was my reality when I first got here. So. And my job was not to come in and be a security engineer when I got there. It was to build out as a cloud engineer, to build out the 2.0 environment, which a lot of that is building out guardrails. So setting up organizations. So naturally, it just kind of progressed into that role. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, we had access keys that were as old as the processes. So 4 years old and things like that. I'm sure I'm speaking to some of you in the crowd that have encountered this and seen this in some early cloud days, but I'll get to the good part. So 2.0 objectives, and just want to lay this out there. These are the objectives that we set out to do. And, in a lot of ways, the reality is as well, but there are some things that we had to pivot on. So developer access, we moved to role-based access. We moved to SSO integrated, MFA enabled, all through Azure. We had a pretty prescriptive, at the time, it was just me doing the cloud security. So we had a pretty prescriptive role-based model. So if you're a developer in one application team, you would have a power user access in the development environment and a read-only access, anything beyond that. We moved to automated deployments. So our pipelines would deploy any infrastructure outside of the development environment. And we basically just had to drive that point home and make that the way. So in QA in the beginning, we fought with some manual deployment, some drift, I guess. But I guess the 80-20 was that we were going to deploy through pipelines. The pipelines deploy resources. We have release management, SSO, checkout accounts that are integrated with ServiceNow for any production rollouts. And again, kind of one of the previous sessions earlier talking about JIT. That's exactly what we found as well, is that from a JIT perspective, these checkout accounts that we did were kind of our home-baked JIT solution, to where you would go in, log into our secret server, have a change ticket that was validated with ServiceNow, then you get access to release your production code. So I could talk more about it. Feel free to, I could talk about that integration specifically for a while. Feel free to, ping me outside of that if you're interested. From a system access perspective, we don't want access keys. I've heard that earlier today as well. A lot of great sessions, by the way. Appreciate all of the contributors to that and the people behind the scenes making that happen. But the access key is a problem. We still have access keys, truthfully, that we, processes that run outside of AWS that we're iteratively trying to remove. That's also a journey. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we have a perfect situation. We still deal with access keys today. And I assume that that's fairly normal. But we discourage it. It requires an exception process that goes through, lands on the desk of pretty much the CISO, like this is a required exception. So also in 2.0, we wanted a logical separation of AWS accounts and therefore permissions, network, et cetera, through many accounts. So a separate dev, QA, production environment. and we also do like network segmentation based on the same thing through transit gateway, et cetera. From a security, I guess, and compliance, more or less, we wanted to define our controls, our detective, corrective, and preventative controls. So what are we doing for detective? We're using CSPM. And we were just talking kind of before the call. CSPM is great for the visibility. It's a starting point. You should have some visibility into it. However, I mean, it's just going to point out your problems. It is not going to out of the box, most likely not going to solve or bring solutions. So just keep that in mind, that you methodically need to come up with a plan to fix those issues and address those as well, especially in automated deployment environments where when you make a correction to a production resource, that ultimately could end up in drift and could cause issues down the road. So just be cognizant of that CSPM is your starting point, and a great way to identify some high severity issues, but it can also be overwhelming. That alert burn down strategy is really important. Corrective. So we've got a couple of different ways. We started out with some automated remediation and then some custom remediation where we built some Python runbooks that would look at compliance issues and then correct based on a schedule. We've tried a lot of different things. Code security was a big one. Obviously, this was not a big thing right when we deployed in 2020 or deployed our AWS organization. But Bridge Crew came out somewhere in 2021, I believe, or we adopted it in 2021 so that we could start scanning our repositories for misconfigurations using Terraform. And then the other preventative policy, organization policy, service control policies. Hopefully, if you've been here the rest of the day or caught any of the other sessions, you're familiar with at least to some degree of service control policies. But moving on here, those are our objectives for 2.0. That was the deployment strategy, and I'll kind of get into some of the baseline service control policy. When you're setting up an AWS organization, we created kind of a 10 commandments, and this was all new. So we used some tools like asecure.cloud. Used to be free. Sorry, it's not anymore, I don't think, or maybe there is a free version, but you can go check it out. That's where we got a good library of where do we start? Okay, how do service control policies work? Okay, so we started piecing some things from there, using some online resources. Organizations was a fairly new concept, especially the Terraform provider for it in the beginning. But we did create kind of a 10 commandments, block the root user, deny the regions. And we've talked about that today in some previous sessions as well. If you're not using a region, there's no reason to allow that region or not block it. And I mean, I wish it was just turned off by default, but et cetera. I'll move on there. But unencrypted services. So preventing people from uploading objects unless they're encrypted in S3, preventing people from spinning up new RDS instances that aren't encrypted by default, enforcing AMIs, and denying unused service, so kind of like a service whitelist for AWS. A lot of these things are themes that that have been discussed earlier with some of the Sunray presentations as well. But just calling that out, just getting a set of these 10 commandments, and they're probably widely available at this point to use as a baseline for organizations. The other thing that we wanted to do, and again, this goes back to the access key thing, is deny the creation of IAM users. So that was a strategy, and definitely still something I recommend, just to set that stuff up initially so that you can, again, move to preventative. Once a resource is out in production, good luck trying to get it back out of production and arguing with the application teams on why you can't do that. It just becomes very, very difficult to pull something back out of production, in my experience. Some of the challenges that we ran into, there's character limits. There are attachment limits to OUs. There are, again, there were some limitations with AWS organizations and Terraform provider that, we couldn't use Terraform with organizations in the beginning. Testing challenges. I personally have caused an outage in production that took down a financial forecasting tool that we had for hours. And it was something to do with a batch process that happened overnight. So I didn't find out till the next morning. That thing takes a while to run. That was a hard lesson learned in knowing exactly how the service control policies work, and also understanding our environment, that our QA and our development environments are very different than our production environment. So even if you've tested it in lower environments, there's possibility that you are going to run into issues in production. I'm not even saying like a possibility. It depends on your environment, of course, but it's a probability. I would say that work with the application teams. It would be hard to anticipate everything that you're going to run into, but sanity check where you can, and just do the due diligence. And again, for us, moving to a platform like Sunray that can help with our automation of service control policies and have done a lot of the R&D would have saved us from something like that happening, because this is just basically it was a service that kind of ran on the back end that we weren't expecting. And when that happened, that took out the batch process. And I think that would have been avoided with somebody dedicated to service control policies like we're going to talk about here in a little bit. That also, when you cause an outage in a batch process, that causes people to lose trust in the system and moves to kind of internal approvals, more processes around service control policies. That became a bit of a problem and a friction point. So FYI, that you could run into. And let's see here. So 2024 objectives, kind of moving flash forward into today. What we wanted to do is set out this year, we had 3 verticals. We had network, we had identity, and data security. And those were the 3 themes that we really wanted to look at this year. When you're looking at your backlog, it's really hard to prioritize, but those were the 3 verticals that we had set up. I'm going to focus just on the identity part, just based on how the theme of this conference. But those, I think it's good to focus on those 3 areas from a network perspective, from an identity and data perspective, ultimately. And I think Chad in a previous slide today talked about identity being at the edge and really is your firewall. So that resonates because the things that you are protecting, that data, it's good to kind of identify that data and track down what can access it. And it all kind of starts with identity. I preach that from the beginning with people who are coming into the cloud team, is you really got to figure out and get a good handle on identity. That's really the building blocks for understanding cloud. So what we wanted to do this year, version control, ensure our identity resources are routed through CI/CD. Ensure we can do preventative scans on that. So prevent, star policies from being deployed, or in an action star. We need to be able to audit our cloud and identity resources, and then centralize management of it. KIM, we want to develop our KIM solution, get a visibility into it, and just see where we're at. And again, this was the start of 2024. Just wanted to get a better idea of what our identity posture was, and identify unused principles. Least privilege. I'm not going to sit here and try to say that we were trying to completely achieve identity nirvana or like least privilege completely. But again, just work toward least privilege where it makes sense. I think there's a lot of ideas about least privilege and a little bit pie in the sky. For us, at least working toward it and getting a handle on the unused and the overly permissive, that's the goal. We didn't have any unrealistic expectations this year that we were going to only provision necessary policies and things like that. Just get better at it, iterate on it. Let's see here. So we discovered a tool called Iambic, definitely something I recommend checking out. Iambic is I am but in code. And what this does, it's a tool that you can deploy in your organization, and it will go out and look for all of your identity resources in AWS. What that means is it will pull your roles, your policies, your permission sets, your service control policies all into one repository, and it converts them to YAML files. So it makes them pretty human readable, and you can kind of see those resources, make changes to those resources. And again, audit those resources all in one repository. Before, we had some manually provisioned IAM roles. We want to prevent drift with this. We want to be able to audit, and we want to enforce a source of truth. And what comes into play here, and something else that you can do with Iambic, is you can, we set up an automation server. And really what that automation server is, runs a cron schedule. And if someone were to make a change, so what is this? This is an organization service control policy. I will say that we have pivoted to using Sunray as our source of truth for Iambic, but for demonstration purposes, if you're looking at this, what we would do is add an enforced flag to this template. And then when the automation server runs on that cron schedule and sees that someone made a change outside of the pipeline, it would go correct it. Runs on a schedule every 5-10 minutes. And then we can know for sure that if someone, like I said, if someone made a change, this would go back to the source of truth, which is Iambic. So we'll enforce all of our policies, permission sets that are distributed at first, and kind of inch our way toward what makes sense for our organization. Obviously, with just a very lean team doing identity, and to some previous points today, we want to allow some developer autonomy with guardrails. We can't control, we can't be the central identity team for all of AWS. That's not scalable and not feasible at our company. So Kim, one thing I want to call out here, we wanted to get a snapshot of how many resources that we had. There's a lot of, and I'm not going to like go into like who the provider is or anything like that, but we had some categorically incorrect information that was pulled from our platform for Kim. And there were some misconfigurations that should indicate that there are overly provisioned access on this diagram that weren't. We're showing 0. Everything looks pretty good here. There's a false sense of security that you really need to do. You do some fact checking. Use IAM Access Analyzer in conjunction with your Kim to kind of make sure that the information is accurate. And I wanted to call that out. As you start stacking up more tools and you start getting more insight, make sure it's correct, because it's not something that you should just rely on one solution for. And I think at the end, if there's time, and I doubt there will be, but I could talk about testing your service control policies and doing some QA testing as well. But just wanted to call that out really quick, that the information represented to you, you need to make sure that it is correct. Code scanning. So I talked about Bridge Crew early on, and I'm going to kind of move through this quickly, running out of time. But code scanning is critical for us. We've got 2 ways to be preventative, and those, if you recall, code scanning and service control policies. So we want to make sure that if a developer does, or anyone, if a cloud ops or anyone provisioning an identity resource, if they do, we want to prevent like the low hanging fruit. We don't want to see stars and resource policy where we can avoid it. We don't want to see, definitely don't want to see star, like a full star in the actions part of the policy. So just preventing those kinds of things from going into our environment, because again, once it's out there, getting it to go back and modifying that is a little bit more challenging, can take a week, can take a couple weeks, et cetera. We got to wait for another sprint. Just try to get preventative as soon as possible if you can. You know, the adage, the shift left mentality. So that's basically what that's getting at. So our initial plan, and this is kind of where it comes into the Sunray and the value we got out of it. So our initial plan was the least privilege plan was to use the Kim that was somewhat unreliable, to create policies and run Python books against those policies to correct least permissions. So I'll give you an example. So somebody goes out and provisions an RDS, full admin attaches it to an RDS instance. Well, this would look at the permissions and remove the permissions based on a finding. It would send an SQS. We would have to set up an SQS queue. We'd have to set up a Lambda function. We'd have to do custom Python coding just to be able to correct that permission set. It was going to take, we were planning on it taking 6 months from basically the second half of the year. We would have infrastructure management, so Lambda functions, perhaps some other compute as well. Custom development for, again, a 2 or 3 person team that's not doing full-time development. removing permissions has a lot of risk associated when you can't easily put it back. And then a lot of potential for alienating app teams because of causing outages. So enter Sunray security. I think I saw it on LinkedIn at the beginning part of the year, and I think they had just released, somebody shared something about Sunray, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I know that no one's doing that right now. I think this could solve a problem. So we set up a demo, we looked through it, and we worked very closely with their team to kind of see if this would fit for us, if it worked how we thought it would work, and if it would solve our problem. And it checked a lot of the boxes that we were trying to set out to solve for this year. And it checked some other boxes with audit that we weren't expecting it to solve for. But the implementation, I guess, when we were looking at it, to go through it and remediate this, again, keep in mind that it was going to take us 6 months to go and try to build this out, and that was anticipated. I'm not really sure exactly what that would have taken, but by doing this, we were able to start with the services and block. If you look at the slide here, you can see that we had a lot of unused identities, a lot of permissions that weren't being used, a lot of zombies. We went through, established a process in development for correcting what are our service block list, and we can now manage that through Sunray. And we were originally managing it, like I said, that's how I broke production. We originally managed it manually. One thing I'm going to call out too, when you're managing it manually, I think I missed this earlier, you have to go put it back. So for example, our root user, we block the root user. If I need to go rotate a credential for root, I got to go manually remove it. Then I got to go rotate the credential, then put it back. I will say that that's caused issues for us and has been a problem for us. So having an automation platform to handle that is also an unintended benefit of Sunray that we weren't expecting. But you can see here what it saved. By starting with the services and then moving to the zombies and then moving to the sensitive permissions, we were able to do that within a few days of starting here, and then we started quarantining zombies, and then we started doing the unused permissions, what would have taken, like I said, months. And not only that, but the chat ops component was hugely beneficial because we got immediate feedback when someone got blocked. We can go reach out to that team and go get the permissions put back if they needed it, to not cause friction with the application team. Sure, when we introduced it, there's a little bit that you have to work through, but when they saw the demo, when they saw it in action, they saw how quickly we could respond, it was a non-issue. And in fact, they could see what we were trying to achieve and the value of the product. So takeaways, what you can do today, there's a lot of open source tooling that you can use today. Iambic's one that I definitely suggest checking out. Get visibility to your environment. Somebody talked about a few open source tools today. I think Prowler was mentioned, and then I latched on to the role-based account factory that Chad was talking about as well. So those are really good tools that you can just kind of look around and find something. And if there's not time for the demo, then I would say that another thing that you can do is use some logic, some creativity, and go use ChatGPT outside of your environment or in a safe, controlled environment to say, how can I test my service control policies to make sure that they're working? Things like that. Shift left toward preventative controls. That's a given. Just to prevent it from, if you can prevent it from going into your production environment, you should. Cloud native tools, if you're using a cloud like AWS or one cloud, then these are the things that you should be using. Some other things that you can use. And then with limited resource, like automation is the only way. So find a way to do it more efficiently. Use things like ChatGPT to help you, I guess, get code or something like a Python runbooks and things like that. All of this kind of starts with that. You're obviously going to have to use your own judgment on certain things that put in your environment, but those are the things that I would say that you could do today. Happy to, if you want to reach out on LinkedIn or anything like that, feel free. That was a lot, and I didn't really expect to go that long, so sorry about that, guys.
Well, Cole, you've actually got some more time. Your session, you're doing great on time. If you want to go into some of your, I know you were working with using SCPs yourself manually and kind of validating them and QAing them with ChatGPT. If you want to dive into that a little bit, we've got some time today.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let me share a different tab here.
And I'll go backstage for a minute, but I'll come back on for Q&A at the end. Keep the questions coming in the chat, y'all, while Cole's going through this with us.
Yeah, so this again was just more or less, how do you do more with less? So I just asked ChatGPT, write a process to ensure that the service control policy is working as intended. And what I really want to do is, hey, is my service control policy that blocks regions working? I don't have any way of knowing that. I set up this thing and somebody said it worked, but I don't know if it's actually working, if certain services work. How do I test that? And ChatGPT's got some advice that you can run through, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I'm more or less like, give me the run book, So I got some of the takeaways from what it initially offered. And then I kind of run through and said, write a Python script to test the service control policy that's working in US East 1 region. And sure enough, it'll give you a policy that will, or a Python runbook that will give you some sort of the structure of doing it. You got to enter some of your own information. You got to build it out, but you get where this is going. You can build this out in your environment. You can start to test things. You can save a lot of time. Like, I'm not a Python developer. I can, enough to be dangerous, but this is something that you can get your baseline started, save you some time on getting it deployed, and then you can kind of do some follow-up questions and interact with ChatGPT a little bit further to say, okay, tell me that, okay, here's the next iteration. Validate that it's working, send the results to an SNS topic. So now I want to get a message. Hey, this failed. I got an access denied here or something like that. Okay, great. So I need feedback that tells me that's working. I want to run that on schedule that says, all right, every month or every week or whatever the schedule is, tell me every week that my service block is working, or every day. I just want an output of what service control policy, tell me that you tried to deploy an S3 bucket that was unencrypted, give me the results, tell me you got an access denied, that's what I'm looking for, and say, hey, success if that happens. So just kind of a real world scenario as you build this out, you could see where this is going. You could kind of see the storyline of me interacting with ChatGPT and how you could do that. So another things that you could do, I don't know about testing this, but like blocking root and things like that, you could develop your service control policies with ChatGPT. You can go ask it to create a service control policy to block root. It will tell you this, the basics, and again, do your independent testing, but it will give you a service control policy to block those services that you need to. So I encourage people, and even my team, to go out and do some testing on their own, use ChatGPT in a safe environment. Use logic to kind of pick out the pieces that you're going to have to build on your own, but bring that to kind of get you that starting point and get the creativity going. So I guess I think that's more or less from a demo perspective. I mean, there's really not a demo, but I just wanted to show kind of the, I guess, how to get through and use AI to your advantage with ChatGPT, and how you can use it in your organization safely.
Awesome. Thanks, Cole. I'm going to have you stop sharing if you don't mind, and we're going to go through some questions that have come